My name is Megan Doobie, and I teach at the Academy of the Holy Names in Tampa, Florida. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about how this session came to be. Several years ago, on a random afternoon, our learning resource specialist in the high school burst into the math office and exclaimed, "I just came from parent conference in the middle school, and all they told me was that my daughter is quiet. I know that she's quiet. She's my daughter. I live with her. I know she's quiet. Why can't you tell me something about what she understands or what she doesn't understand?" And I started thinking about how often I have said to parents in a conference, "Your daughter is quiet." At the time, I thought about my Algebra 2 class. No longer do my students sit in desks in rows. They do now because of COVID, but hopefully not for long. But instead, my classroom had been transformed into a workspace, a really diverse workspace, in fact, where children could stand at the board on the wall and write. I had all writable tables that were on wheels and chairs that were on wheels, so we could move pretty much every piece of furniture in the entire room. There was no front of the room where I stood and taught. Students worked in teams to work through difficult problems, and I wandered around the room asking questions and providing feedback. What was this experience like for an introverted student? I realized quickly that I, as a student, would have hated my own classroom. And so I started some dialogue with my more introverted girls and asked them what was hard for them about the class, what they enjoyed about the class, and how I could make their experience better. This presentation is born out of those efforts. It's born out of talking to students, reading the research, and finding ways that teachers can overcome their inherent bias towards those who participate verbally to better understand and serve the children who are quiet in our classrooms. The day I realized that I, as a student, would hate my own collaborative classroom, I began a journey to better understand the needs of my introverted students and to try to create a classroom better suited to meeting those needs. Throughout my life, I thought that everyone was worried about being wrong, feared their comment would not sufficiently add to the conversation or move forward the dialogue, needed more time to process or reflect before responding, or mentally rehearsed a million times over what they wanted to say before speaking in class. It turns out, not everyone does. Introverts do. Research reflects a biological basis for introversion. Beginning in infancy, children who are described as highly reactive to their surroundings will grow into adults who largely are introverts. Introverts have a sensitive nervous system and tend to notice more about their surroundings in general, leading to sometimes being overwhelmed by the vast amount of stimuli they take in. This explains why introverts need to withdraw at times to find a quiet space or to be away from people in order to recharge. According to Rethinking Classroom Participation by Catherine Schultz, research also indicates that teachers have an implicit preference for extroverted students, often judging quiet students as unintelligent or unengaged. How can we as teachers do better to provide for the needs of our introverted students? Before diving into some strategies, I'm going to offer a few questions for reflection. What do we value as teachers? Consider for a moment how you view, encourage, and grade participation in your own classroom. What counts as participation? Is it the student who raises his or her hand constantly? Is there a nonverbal way to participate? When you consider the students in your classroom who participate frequently, who do you think of? When you consider students who infrequently participate, who do you think of? Recognizing that a quiet student can be as engaged, if not more, as a responsive or verbal student, how do you know in your own classroom when a student is engaged? What do measures of engagement look like beyond the student who's jumping out of his chair wanting to answer the question, or the student who always has something to say in the discussion? where does your room offer additional opportunities or alternative opportunities for engagement? How do you as a teacher look to that engagement? How do you know which students are engaged and which are not? Take a moment and imagine your end of the year awards ceremony. Which students, picture them, which students are receiving awards? How are categories of awards or descriptions of awards determined? To receive an award, does a student have to be outgoing, participative, well-known? Who receives the awards in your school? Last year, at the onset of COVID, so many of us pivoted quickly, some with a day or two notice, to online, virtual, remote classrooms. What do engagement and participation look like in a virtual or remote classroom? Can students participate non-verbally in a video-based platform? Are there other options for remote instruction? First, introverts may be more likely to contribute halfway through class after others have spoken. For some introverts, the anxiety of going first or having to open a conversation is considerably more difficult than being able to jump in halfway through, having had an opportunity to plan out or rehearse what you want to say in your head before actually speaking it out loud to the class. Number 2, some introverts have anxiety simply about raising their hand. Knowing your students and knowing their personality is incredibly helpful so that when a student who maybe is shy, introverted, quiet, whatever word you would like to use, when that student raises her hand, as the teacher, knowing that that's the moment to pick her, not to skip her over for someone who participates a lot, may encourage her to raise her hand in the future, number 1, but also affirms her choice to raise her hand in this moment to overcome her anxiety and to share the important information that she's raised her hand to share. Extroverts tend to talk just to talk, while introverts only raise their hand, only choose to contribute when they have something worthwhile to say. Knowing that, when an introverted student raises his or her hand, again, that is the moment to choose that student rather than the one who participates frequently. Because the one who participates frequently, if an extrovert, sometimes likes to talk just to talk, and there's nothing wrong with that. But introverted students, generally, when they raise their hand, really have something to contribute to the conversation to move it forward. 4, we all know that extended wait time is a good pedagogical practice. I remember practicing wait time in grad school and not getting it in the role play, the false classroom sense. However, in a real classroom, take the time, count in your head, say a quick prayer, give students the time to think, and it will really benefit all students. This can be challenging for extroverts who want to jump right in. However, all students will benefit knowing I'm having 30 seconds to think before I need to say anything out loud. So offering extended wait time will help introverts to plan what they want to say, but will really benefit all students. One strategy that comes from the students themselves is the idea of think, pair, share. I've had a number of students, both in informal conversations and through a graduate research project, tell me that it's not that they don't like talking, it's that they're intimidated or don't like talking to the entire class. However, they recognize that they have something to share and they find their own opinion worthwhile, but they also think the class would benefit from knowing what they have to say. They're just not sure how to say it. Using a strategy like Think, Pair, Share allows an introverted student to share their ideas with a classmate, but they don't have to share them with the full class. If student A can talk to student B and share her ideas, then when it comes time for some whole group sharing, student B can be the one who verbally, to the rest of the class, shares student A's ideas. So they're still contributing, they're still participating, but they're not the one verbally sharing the idea with the class. Number 6, be prepared to contribute at the beginning and avoid the unknown later. One of the pitfalls of anxiety for introverted students or for quiet students is never knowing when you will be called on. And students have talked about the mental rehearsal of, is she going to call me next? Is she going to call on me next? And how that cycle of anxiety really prevents them from engaging, participating, and learning because they're so involved in their own heads and unable to concentrate on the lesson at hand. Therefore, when you have a student who you know is anxious about participating, is uneasy in sharing, to be able to say, John, I'm going to call on you second today. When we get to class on Tuesday, know that I'm going to call on you as the second person. That way, John can prepare ahead of time what he wants to say. And for the rest of class, he'll be able to pay attention, not stressed out from, is she going to call on me next? What will I say? What if I look silly? What if everyone laughs at me? That spiraling that happens in our heads, knowing when they will be called on allows an introvert to plan for that moment and actually engage in the rest of the time. One of the benefits of teaching in the 21st century is electronic communication. There are so many ways that we can reach out beyond just calling on a kid in class. I'm not sure why it took me so long as a teacher, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I realized I can send kids one-line emails that say, you know what, I'm really proud of you for the way you shared in class today, or I've been thinking all day about what a great idea it was you had third period. But just to both affirm kids' decisions to participate, or as in number 6, where it says to be prepared to contribute, to say, you know what, Jane, I'm going to ask you to participate second tomorrow, so be ready for that. But just to give kids accolades via email, to affirm their decisions, and to let them really know that you are supporting them in their challenge sometimes to maybe speak up more than they are comfortable or more than they are used to. That you are in this with them. You are their ally rather than their enemy. Number 8, find the right role. In my Algebra 2 class, we work specifically in teams. So each team is made up of generally 5 students, where each member of the team has a specific role. One of them writes, is the recorder who writes everything on the table. One of them is the one who gathers, this happens less in COVID, but gathers the materials. One of them is in charge of reading the directions and making sure they are adhering to the directions. One is the facilitator who makes sure that everyone is on task, everyone is included, and so forth. And one of them, the fifth person, is the person who is the presenter, the reporter. It would be really challenging for someone who is introverted, quiet, or has anxiety about speaking in front of the class to be the reporter. So knowing your students' personalities can help them have the right fit in their group. If there's a shy person, it's not to say they can't be the reporter, but if that's not a role they're comfortable with, that student might be better as the person who is recording the notes, the person who is gathering the materials, the person who is reading the directions to a small group rather than contributing or having to share with the entire class. So the right role is critical to allow students to truly engage with material and be present to the course. Number 9, don't accept silence. Some of the things on this list contradict each other, and I'm okay with that, because for as much as we talk about finding the right role and not making a student who is introverted or quiet or socially anxious to be the reporter and have to present to the whole class. There is a time and a place where every student needs to say something in the class. That might be a really simple sentence, or it might be everyone's giving a presentation, reciting a poem, whatever it is. So although it's important to help students find their right role and participate as they are comfortable in doing, as teachers, we can't accept silence. Saying nothing for the entire year really isn't an option. What the goal is to find a way that everyone is comfortable participating the majority of the time, so as to minimize the not comfortable moments, the uncomfortable moments, and to allow students to build confidence to overcome those moments. Number 10, recognize that school is hard. All the people in the room make introverts tired. So going back to the neurological research on personality and introversion, one of the things we find is that introverts are highly stimulated. That's why they get tired so much faster. That's why they withdraw from social situations, because all of the stimulation is really overwhelming. The same is true of school. Picture school. We walk around a building with 100, 500, 1,000, 2,000, I'm not sure how big your school is, people all day long. Being surrounded by people, both in the halls, in the classroom, in the cafeteria, is very exhausting for introverts. Not from the perspective of learning or engaging with schoolwork, material, homework, clubs, sports. It's not even those things. It's just being surrounded by people all day is exhausting for an introverted student. One student in Susan Cain's Quiet book talks about coming home from school and her mom wanting to have a conversation and ask her questions, and goes on. And the kid finally just says, "Mom, I can't. I need to go and have 15, 30, an hour, a minute, of quiet time so that I can recharge before I'm really ready to be with people again." And so just recognizing that sometimes being around people is the challenge before we even get to the course material, is also a step to overcome bias to an extrovert or preference for extroverts. And finally, number 11 has actually been easier, I think, during COVID, is to use journals and written communication. So there are a number of, infinitely many, honestly, sites that you can use to work on journals or have written communication with students. They apply in pretty much every subject. We had journals in Algebra 2 last year, back when we used paper, and students would simply record their learning every day. They would record their big ideas, they would record their questions, and that enabled me to both see what they were learning, to leave them some feedback. It allowed my quiet students to ask a question on paper that they maybe were apprehensive about asking during class, even one-on-one. That's actually something that's not on this list, is to make sure that your introverts, and whether you make sure of it in class, whether you follow up by email, whether it's through your journal and written communication, to make sure your introverts know they can come to you one-on-one to ask a question. They don't need to ask it in front of the whole class if that's not something they're comfortable with, but that their questions need to be asked. That's an important part of the learning process. You can't hold on to your questions because you won't learn. So journals and written communication can be used across the board in pretty much every discipline, every subject, and allow for students to really demonstrate that they have engaged with the material. They are learning. There is something they're taking away from this. Written communication is equally valid to spoken communication, to verbal communication. However, because of the nature of our classrooms, sometimes we don't use it as frequently, or we don't count it as significantly as discussion-based communication. Before we close, I'd like you to consider one practice you can use in your classroom next week. As you've seen, these strategies don't require a major overhaul of your classroom, but are simple ways to better serve all of our students. Take a moment to identify one thing, you can do next week and share it with someone. Maybe you're watching with colleagues at school and you can share with each other. Maybe you can share it on your teacher's social media. Or maybe you'd even consider sharing it with me. Either way, thank you for your time and your presence. Maybe we'll get to meet at another NCEA one day soon.